The fire that named a legend. The smell of gasoline was still thick in the air when B.B. King realized what he'd left behind. 200 people had evacuated the Twist, Arkansas dance hall in under 3 minutes. The flames were reaching toward the ceiling, orange tongues licking at the wooden rafters like hungry animals. Outside in the gravel parking lot, folks stood in clusters, some still holding their drinks, all of them staring at the building that had been alive with music just moments before. That's when BB noticed his hands were empty. His guitar was still inside. The Gibson acoustic he'd bought with money earned picking cotton in the Mississippi Delta, the instrument that had carried him from plantation fields to small-town stages across the South. The guitar that was, in every way that mattered, his livelihood. Inside that burning building, B.B. King was 24 years old, and he'd spent every one of those years understanding that a black man in Arkansas had to be careful, had to think twice, had to weigh every action against every possible consequence. But standing in that parking lot, watching smoke pour from the windows of the dance hall, thinking wasn't what happened. Moving was what happened. The evening had started like any other Saturday night at the Twist. BB had arrived early to set up the stage and test the sound system, a couple of microphones, and a small amplifier that Jake had bought secondhand from a church in Little Rock. He'd been playing the Twist for 8 months, every Saturday night, earning $15 a show plus tips. It wasn't much money, but it was steady, and it was music. Tonight had been different because of the woman who'd walked in around 9 o'clock. She was tall, with skin the color of coffee with just enough cream, and she wore a red dress that moved like water when she walked. She carried herself with the confidence of someone used to being the most beautiful woman in any room. BB had noticed her, certainly. Every man in the place had noticed her. But he was working, and work meant focusing on the music, not on distractions. The woman had taken a seat near the back, ordered a whiskey neat, and spent the first set watching BB play with an intensity that made him self-conscious. When the break came, she'd stayed in her seat, while most folks went outside. That's when the trouble started. 2 men approached her during intermission. Tommy Brackett, a local farm owner's son who thought his daddy's money gave him rights to things that weren't for sale, and a well-dressed stranger from out of town who'd introduced himself as a talent scout from Memphis. BB watched it develop from the bandstand while retuning his guitar. Tommy had walked up to the woman's table with the swagger of someone who'd never been told no. The conversation was brief. BB could see her polite but firm rejection in her posture, the way she turned slightly away while still acknowledging his presence. Tommy walked away, but not far. He positioned himself at the bar where he could keep watching, nursing a whiskey and building up whatever combination of courage and resentment would drive his next move. The stranger took a different approach. He approached the woman's table with something in his hand, a business card maybe. Their conversation lasted longer, and the woman seemed more interested. She leaned forward when he spoke, asked questions, even smiled. When BB started the second set, the stranger was sitting at the woman's table, and Tommy was still at the bar, his knuckles white around his whiskey glass. The fight erupted during Crossroad Blues. Tommy had confronted the stranger at the woman's table. "I said she was with me." Tommy's voice carried over the music. "I don't believe the lady mentioned being with anyone," the stranger replied, his voice calm but edged. The woman, Lucille, though BB wouldn't learn her name until later, stood up. "Gentlemen, I'm not with either of you. I'm here for the music, and I'd appreciate it if you'd let me enjoy it in peace." She gathered her purse and started to leave, but Tommy grabbed her wrist. That was the moment everything changed. The stranger moved fast. One moment Tommy was holding Lucille's wrist, the next he was stumbling backward, his hand empty, his face red with embarrassment and rage. "Keep your hands to yourself," the stranger said, positioning himself between Tommy and Lucille. Tommy threw the first punch. The stranger ducked, and Tommy's fist connected with nothing but air and the momentum of too much whiskey. He spun around, off balance, and crashed into the table behind him. Glasses and bottles went flying. People jumped up, and suddenly half the room was in motion. Within seconds, what had started as an argument over a woman who'd already left the building became a full-scale brawl involving 20 people. During the chaos, someone knocked over the kerosene heater that Jake kept near the back wall. The heater fell onto its side, spilling burning fuel across the wooden floor. The flames caught on, spilled whiskey first, creating a line of fire that spread faster than anyone could react to. Then the fire reached the wall, where it found old, dry wood that Jake had never been able to afford to replace. By the time people realized what was happening, the fire was already too big to stop. The evacuation was surprisingly orderly. Maybe it was because folks in rural Arkansas understood that when something was beyond saving, you saved yourself instead. Maybe it was Jake's clear directions. Or maybe it was luck that everyone got out alive. Everyone except Tommy Brackett, who'd been knocked unconscious during the brawl and fallen behind the bar when people started running. In the chaos and smoke, nobody had seen him there, and everyone except Baby's guitar. The fire department hadn't arrived yet. The building was maybe half consumed, flames visible in some windows but not others. The front entrance was still clear, though smoke poured out like water from a broken dam. Baby looked around the parking lot. Nobody was watching him. Everyone's attention was on the spectacle of the burning building. The sheriff's deputy was busy keeping people back from the structure. This was the moment when B.B. King made the decision that would define not just his career, but his understanding of what mattered most in his life. He walked back toward the building, not running, not charging, just walking with the steady purpose of a man who'd made peace with what he had to do. The heat hit him before he reached the door. Waves of it that seemed to push against his chest and face. The smoke was thick enough to chew, and BB pulled his shirt up over his nose and mouth as he stepped through the entrance. Inside was chaos, painted in orange and black. The fire had claimed the back third of the hall, turning tables and chairs into twisted sculptures of charcoal. The bandstand where he'd been playing was on the far side of the room, not yet touched by flames but definitely in their path. The smoke made everything unclear. BB moved by memory and instinct, keeping low, one hand on the wall to guide him. The heat was intense, but manageable. The visibility was worse than the heat. Every step was a guess about what lay ahead. He made it to the bandstand in less than a minute. His guitar was exactly where he'd left it, lying across two chairs, the polished wood reflecting the orange glow of the approaching fire. The sight hit him harder than he'd expected. Not just relief that it was there and undamaged, but something deeper, recognition maybe. The understanding that this instrument wasn't just a tool for making music, but a part of who he was. BB grabbed the guitar and turned to leave. That's when he heard the voice. "Help me?" It came from near the bar, weak and strained and almost lost in the sound of the fire. BB stopped, guitar in hand, smoke stinging his eyes, trying to locate the source. There, behind the overturned bar, was Tommy Brackett, the man who'd started the fight that caused the fire. He was conscious but trapped under a beam that had fallen from the ceiling, and his left leg was bent at an unnatural angle. B.B. King stood there for maybe 10 seconds, looking at this man who'd caused the fire that was destroying the building, who'd endangered everyone in the hall. 10 seconds during which B.B. could have walked away with his guitar and let Tommy face the consequences of his own actions. 10 seconds during which B.B. King learned something about himself that would shape every decision he made for the rest of his life. He couldn't leave someone behind. B.B. set his guitar down and went to help. The beam was heavy but not impossible. It had caught Tommy across his chest and left leg, pinning him but not crushing him. B.B. set his guitar down and went to help. The beam was heavy but not impossible. It had caught Tommy across his chest and left leg, pinning him but not crushing him. B.B. managed to lift it enough for Tommy to crawl out, though the effort left both of them gasping in the smoke-filled air. "Can you walk?" B.B. asked. "I think so," Tommy said weakly. "Thank you. Jesus, thank you. Don't thank me yet. We still got to get out of here." "Your guitar," Tommy noticed. "That's why you came back." "That's right." Tommy looked at BB with an expression that was hard to read through the smoke and shadows. "And you're helping me because?" BB picked up his guitar with one hand and helped Tommy to his feet with the other, because that's what people do for each other. The trip back was harder. The smoke was thicker, the heat more intense, and the fire had spread to block their original path. They had to take a longer route along the wall toward a side door. Tommy kept stumbling, each step a negotiation between staying upright and falling down. BB found himself carrying more of the other man's weight while protecting his guitar from the heat and smoke. Halfway to the exit, Tommy stopped moving entirely. "I can't," he said, leaning against the wall. "My leg. I can't feel my leg." BB looked ahead at the side door, maybe 20 feet away. Behind them, the fire was getting closer. They had maybe 2 minutes. "I'm going to carry you," BB said. BB handed Tommy his guitar to hold, then positioned himself to support most of Tommy's weight on his shoulders. It was awkward and painful, but it worked. Step by step, they made their way toward the exit. The side door was locked. BB tried the handle again, hoping he'd been wrong. He hadn't been. The door was definitely locked, and there was no key visible. "Now what?" Tommy asked. BB looked around for something to break the door with. There was a chair nearby, partially damaged by the fire, but still intact enough to use. "Cover your face," BB said, picking up the chair. It took 3 tries to break the door open, and by then the fire had advanced enough that they could feel its heat on their backs. But when the door finally gave way, they stumbled out into the cool Arkansas night air. The gathering crowd let out a collective gasp of surprise when BB and Tommy appeared from the side of the building. People had assumed everyone was accounted for. BB helped Tommy over to the sheriff's deputy, then walked away from the crowd to check his guitar for damage. The finish was smudged with soot and there was a small burn mark on the back, but otherwise it was fine. Every string still in tune. That's when someone tapped him on the shoulder. It was Jake, the owner of the dance hall, a white man in his 50s with weathered features and tired eyes. "Son," Jake said, "that was either the bravest thing or the stupidest thing I've ever seen a man do." BB looked back at the building, now fully engulfed. "What do you think?" Jake studied him for a moment. "I think it depends on what you went back in there for." BB held up his guitar. "And him?" BB added, nodding toward Tommy, who was being loaded into an ambulance. Jake nodded slowly. "Yeah, I figured." They stood together, watching the firefighters work. 20 years of Jake's life, reduced to charcoal and memory. "I'm sorry about the twist." BB said. Jake shrugged. Buildings burn down. People matter more than buildings. They were quiet for a moment, both thinking about what this meant for BB's Saturday night income, for the musicians who depended on the twist for regular work. You know what started the fight? Jake asked eventually. BB shook his head. Woman named Lucille. Real pretty girl from Little Rock. Both those boys thought they had a claim on her attention. Jake lit a cigarette. Funny thing is, she'd already left before the fighting even started. Went home with somebody else entirely. BB looked down at his guitar. The firelight was still reflecting off its polished surface, and suddenly the instrument seemed different to him. Not just a tool for making music, but something worth risking everything for. Lucille? BB said quietly. What's that? Her name was Lucille? That's right. BB ran his thumb across the guitar strings. I'm going to name my guitar Lucille, to remind me never to do something that stupid again. Jake laughed. Son, if that's the lesson you're taking from tonight, you didn't learn nothing at all. What do you mean? What you did in there going back for what mattered to you, then helping a stranger who needed it. That wasn't stupid. That was the most sensible thing anybody did all night. Jake dropped his cigarette and ground it out. Most people spend their whole lives not knowing what's worth saving. You figured it out in about 5 seconds. BB was quiet, processing Jake's words. There's something else, Jake said. The way you played tonight, before all this happened, that was some of the best music I've heard in 20 years of running clubs. The compliment hit BB harder than he'd expected. Really? Son, I've heard Muddy Waters play in my club. I've heard Howlin' Wolf, T-Bone Walker. Tonight, you were playing at that level. You think I got a chance? BB asked. Really? I think you got more than a chance. I think you got a gift. And tonight, you proved you're willing to risk everything to protect it. BB King left Arkansas that night with his guitar, which he would call Lucille for the rest of his career, and with an understanding that would shape everything he did afterward. The understanding that some things are worth any risk, and that when you know what those things are, you don't hesitate. You just act. But there was more to it than that. BB had also learned that courage wasn't just about protecting what mattered to you, it was about helping others, even when they were the cause of your problems. The story of that night followed BB wherever he went. But BB always downplayed it, always made it sound like the most natural thing in the world. A man's gotta have his guitar, he'd say. Everything else is just conversation. But those who knew him understood that the real story wasn't about saving a guitar. It was about a young man discovering what he was willing to sacrifice for, and then discovering that when you're willing to sacrifice everything for something, you usually don't have to. The guitar he saved that night became the most famous instrument in blues history. Every Lucille that came after carried the memory of that fire, that decision, that moment when BB King decided what mattered most. The fire burned down the dance hall, but it built something else. It built a legend. Not because BB King was brave, but because he was clear about what he valued, clear about what he'd risk for it, and clear about the fact that when someone needs help, you help them, even if they're the reason you're in danger in the first place. That kind of clarity makes the difference between someone who plays music and someone who is music, between someone who has a guitar and someone whose guitar has a name, between someone who survives a fire and someone who walks back into one, because they know exactly what they can't live without. The flames in Arkansas burned out before dawn. But the story they created burned for the rest of BB King's life, and beyond. Every time he introduced Lucille to an audience, he was really introducing them to a night when everything that mattered was at risk, and one man decided that some things are worth walking through fire to save. That's not just blues, that's life. Interested